know I'm supposed to say something, but if I do, you might not get a sermon. Can I just preach? I think you know what I feel. Yeah, I can't say it. I'll just preach, okay? I have enjoyed my time here. I'm trying. I've enjoyed my time here. I've learnt to care for many of you, so it's very hard to say goodbye. But I do pray God's blessings on all of you. And we're still going to be living here in Watford for a while, so I'll be around. I'll be around. So, I'm taking the unusual stand of preaching what I preached last week in parallel. Because everything I have done in ministry is only because of God's power. I know with all my health problems I shouldn't be doing what I do. But it's God's power that has made it possible. And so I wanted this final sermon for you to look at God's power again. Because his power isn't just available for the things he's done in my life. His power is available for what he wants to do in your life. So, let's begin. Now, during our current preaching series, Back to the Future, we've been looking at the life of Jesus again. What he did, what he said, and the impact that he made on the lives of those around him. And one of the things that we have been reminded about is how Jesus was able to take any stone-dead situation and turn it into a cause for celebration. So today, instead of going back, we're going to stay with the present and look at how Jesus can still work with situations that help make us feel that sometimes as if our lives are in lockdown. And so this morning, I'm not going to preach. I'm just going to tell you how God solved a stone-dead situation for me in a way in which I never imagined. But before I do that, I want to ask you a couple of questions. Have you ever felt confused about God? Confused about the way he is working in your life? Have you ever wondered whether God really does care for you? Because if he did, would he let you go through the things that you are going through? Have you ever felt the forgotten one in God's family? Others seem to be blessed with one good thing after another, but your life seems to be so full of pauses and full stops that you at times feel stockpiled under the weight of them. I have. In 2013, I was diagnosed with a gallstone. It was a health challenge that actually caused me to go backwards in my relationship with God. As you know, I have ankylosing spondylitis and bronchiectasis. Both are incurable. And it was too much for me to have a third health problem. And even though on the outside I acted as if everything was fine, on the inside I was falling apart. I would read passages like 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13, which says, "He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear." And I would say, God, can these words be true? Because this is too much for me to bear. I felt that God had gone too far. He had given me something that I couldn't handle. And it was only later that I realized that I was never meant to handle it because Jesus was there to carry it for me. Now, for most people, having a gallstone or gallstones is no big deal. There are many who walk around oblivious to their presence within their lives, and those who experience pain, an operation to remove the gallbladder is all that is required. But not for me. With the growth of my gallstone came the growth of my fears. An operation for me carried the possibility, the very real possibility, that I could die, as that is what I had been told. 3 times I had been refused anesthetic by different consultants. Once when I was actually being wheeled into a theatre on the trolley. Another time a consultant looked at the lack of movement in my neck, looked at my notes, shook his head and walked away. And so I ended up having one procedure by heavy sedation and another one by an epidural. The consultants knew that the risk of me not recovering from anesthetic was of more concern than any operation I might need. The words, "It is a problem," had been said so many times to me that they were firmly embedded in my mind and in my heart. And so my gallstone and I learnt to live with one another. Not happily, but we learnt to tolerate one another. I stayed away from as much oil and fat as I could so as to not agitate the gallstone, and the gallstone became a silent resident. But something else also took up residency within me, and that was anger. It doesn't seem to be right to be angry with God, does it, when he does so much for us? But that is what I felt. Angry because there were no more afternoon teas with yummy cakes when I felt stressed, no more chips on a Saturday night when I was tired, no more going out with friends and just ordering what I wanted to eat. I hated the restrictions. I hated what God had stamped permissible in my life. I really also began to feel anxious. Despite all the Bible verses telling me that God knew what was best for me, and despite all the amazing things that God has done for me in the past, I feared an operation. One day when I was at breaking point, I cried out to God to do whatever he wanted with that gallstone. I didn't even care if I died. I just wanted God to sort it out because I couldn't keep living with the effect that it was having on me. I didn't expect God to answer my cry in the way in which he did. Early last year, I was selected to go as a delegate to the General Conference session. The decision confused me. Why me? Why, with all my health issues, why out of a conference of 98 pastors would I be the only one chosen to go to the GC? Because it made no sense, I accepted the invitation, thinking that the BUC or the TED would have the wisdom to block it. Surely it was a mistake that I had been chosen. But it wasn't blocked, so I figured God wanted me to go. I checked with my consultants and I was assured that I had nothing to worry about. The gallstone had lived with me as silently as a mouse within a house, so no one expected any problems. If for some reason in the States the situation would change, I would just be given a course of antibiotics. There would be no need to fear an operation in the States because there would be no need of one. However, a few months before I was due to fly out, I began to experience pain in my back, so bad that it would wake me up at night. I checked it with the doctors and nobody linked it to the gallbladder. I also began to feel unwell. Even though I worked, everything was an effort, and so I decided that my trip to the GC would be the last thing I would do as a pastor. I would resign on my return. I later found out that I had been feeling so ill because of my gallbladder. On Monday, the 29th of June, we flew to Charlottesville. We'd planned to spend a few days there en route to San Antonio. On the flight, I had pain, not severe pain, but enough pain to know that something wasn't right. By the time we arrived in San Antonio on the Wednesday, I felt weak. I had no energy. I was shivering. My pain had increased. We planned to see a doctor the next day, and in the morning, God gave me a hint that he was going to do something extraordinary. I had been dutifully reading my Sabbath School lessons and my morning worships as we do. However, a little while before, I felt impressed not to continue to do so. Instead, I felt impressed that I needed to read the book of Jeremiah. That morning, I had reached chapter 30. Verse 12 of that chapter reads like this: "Your wound is incurable, your injury beyond healing." Yes, I said to God, I know that my wounds are incurable. You don't have to tell me. But then I read, verse 17. But I will restore you to health and heal your wounds, declares the Lord. Oh Lord, I prayed, I know that you will heal me in your kingdom, but I really need the help right now. A trip to the doctor reassured me that God had answered my prayers, or so I thought. The doctor said that he didn't think it was the gallstone that was causing the problems because I didn't have the typical symptoms of a gallbladder attack. I was probably suffering from a viral infection. He gave me some antibiotics to take as a preventative measure. I thanked the doctor, thanked God, clutched my prescription, and looked forward to going to the GC and presenting my little speech concerning women's ordination. However, Sabbath morning, the 4th of July, Independence Day, I awoke feeling so weak that I didn't have the energy to fix my hair. Now that's a definite sign that a woman is ill. My sister-in-law Mandy and her husband, who had planned some time before, joined us that weekend from Florida, and they took us to the hospital. Incidentally, Mandy is a nurse practitioner, and even though she had planned to attend the GC at the end of the session, she felt impressed that she had to come that first weekend. And she stayed with me in the hospital supervising everything that I needed until I was discharged. And if I were to die, knowing that Jonathan had his sister with him gave me comfort. Mandy also was friends with Ted Wilson's daughter, so she arranged for me to be prayed that very day at the GC. After several tests and a CT scan, we were shocked to learn that the gallbladder was so infected, so inflamed, that it had to come out within 24 hours. Sitting on my bed, I began to cry. Jonathan put his arm around me and said to the doctors, "No, you cannot operate on my wife. There are problems. I will take her back to England straight away. She's under the care of 2 professors at Hammersmith Hospital. If she has to have an operation, it has to be with them." "No," came the reply. The wall of the gallbladder was so thick that they could not let me out of the hospital, and no way could I go on a plane. The gallbladder could burst at any time. In fact, they feared that whilst trying to remove it, that the gallbladder would actually fall apart. They later discovered that it had stuck to my intestine, and the stone, which was large, was pushing on the wall of my stomach. As I cried, I talked silently with God. "Why, God? Why did you bring me here for this to happen? Don't let me die without saying goodbye to my daughters. Don't let Jonathan have to take me home in a casket." Jonathan began listing the problems. "My wife's neck does not tilt. You will not be able to put her under anesthetic." "No problem," came the reply. "We have a special instrument here for those who cannot tilt their necks. But her ribs, they do not move. Her lungs will not be able to expand fully after the operation, and one of her lungs is partially collapsed." "No problem," said another doctor. "We have checked her lungs, and even though she does have a lung problem, her X-ray shows no collapse of any part of her lungs. In fact, she is fit and healthy. We are not worried about this operation." I stopped crying. No one had ever said "no problem" to me concerning an operation. Had God taken me all the way to America just to have my gallbladder removed? I have letters from different hospitals saying that as a result of different tests, that one of my lungs partially collapsed a few years ago. Now the doctors in America were saying that there was no sign of it. And yes, as a matter of routine, if I fly somewhere hot and the journey exceeds 5 hours, then I have to embark upon extensive exercises 1 week before and to take anti-inflammatories every day. Instead of my doctor giving me 1 week to do this, he actually gave me 2. So for 2 weeks, I walked twice a day, I swam each day, I used weights, I did everything I was supposed to do preparing for the flight, not knowing that God was preparing me for an operation. No wonder the doctor said I was so fit and healthy. And while I was trying to make sense of all of this, Jonathan continued to share some other minor concerns regarding the operation. And each time the answer he received was the same: no problem. Finally, the surgeon walked up to Jonathan, put his hand on his arm, looked at him full in the face and said, "I hear your concerns, I understand, but I want you to know we can do this. We can do this." And they did. The operation was a success. The only complication was my heart rate, which began to drop after the operation, possibly due to a reaction to a drug. And even that was covered beforehand, because every time the surgeon spoke to me before the operation, he kept asking God to bless my little heart. And guess what? The operation was carried out by a surgeon who worked in 5 different hospitals, but he just happened to be at the hospital that I went to that afternoon. And he wasn't just any surgeon. He had been voted top doctor by his peers. He's a fellow of the American College of Surgeons, and he is a partner in an institute in Texas where surgeons from all around the world go to learn about advanced laparoscopic procedures. And that is what I had. He trains and he educates surgeons from all around the world. God not only provided me with a surgeon that I would not normally have access to, but I didn't even have to pick up the bill. The travel insurance paid it all for me. In the Message Bible, in 1 Peter 4, verses 12 to 13, it says this: "Friends, when life gets really difficult, don't jump to the conclusion that God isn't on the job." So easy, isn't it? When we are hit with one problem after another, to think that God is doing nothing, that he has cold-shouldered us. But that is what the power of evil wants you to believe. God is always on the job, putting things in place to change a situation or to give us what we need to live with that situation. When I look back at everything that happened that week and during my recovery time, I am ashamed to say that I thought God was doing nothing, because now I see that he was putting into place the things that needed to be done so that that situation would change. He was doing it long before I saw that situation change. But God didn't just work behind the scenes for the operation only. God did more than I needed after the operation too. Because when I thought God was not on the job, he was putting together my own personal medical team. When I returned to the hotel after the operation, I was pretty frightened. Because if I could mistake the pain of a gallbladder attack for an AS pain, then how would I know what pains were okay for me to experience after an operation? 2 delegates at the GC were relatives of the Moser family. Not only are they both doctors, but John is a gallbladder surgeon. And so each day they would come and visit me and patiently talk to me and examine me if needs be, but answer all my questions as to how I should be feeling after an operation. And when I came back to England, Susie Moser would come and visit me every day to make sure I was okay. God placed in my life my own personal medical team. And when I thought God was not on the job, he was putting together a prayer team for me. Because I'd responded so well to the operation, I was allowed to fly home 1 week after it, instead of waiting the usual 2 weeks, which is the norm. I was scared to fly. But on that second flight home, I discovered that there was a retired Adventist nurse and several Seventh-day Adventists who were praying for me the whole time we were coming home. That kept me calm. And when I thought God was not on the job, he gave me squeaky clean lungs. With my lung problems, I'm prone to chest infections, especially after an operation. But every time my lungs were examined, that 8 weeks recovery time after the operation, they were declared to be squeaky clear, even though that's not how they should be. And when I thought God was not on the job, he was putting together some expert advice. A year before, my husband started a health course at Newbold College, and he was due to go there 1 week after we got back to England. He didn't want to leave me because I wasn't meant to lift or carry or drive. And so Newbold College very kindly moved him to a double room free of charge with no extra cost for food so that I could stay with him. And if that wasn't enough, the first week I was there, one of the tutors was a Romanian health director, and he showed me what exercises I could do until I was well enough to get back into my full exercise program. And the second week I was there was a health director from the GC who spent time with me, showing me how to recuperate and how to live without a gallbladder. And I didn't need to pay for any of it. And when I thought God was not on the job, he spoke to me through his word. Whenever I would worry about my gallstone, Jonathan would quietly repeat Psalm 23 to me. In fact, throughout my time in America, when I was scared, God would repeat that psalm to me over and over again. However, when I got home, I was still worried that something could go wrong, or I would get a chest infection. Susie Moser would come and listen to my fears. And one day she turned up on my doorstep and she said, "I've been thinking about you, and I decided to embroider a pillowcase for you to help you to trust God more." She told me that she didn't know what Bible verse to put on it, so she asked God. And this is what God impressed her to put on it. A shepherd carrying a sheep, saying Mary's shepherd is Jesus. I never told anyone that Jonathan would calm my heart by reciting "The Lord is my shepherd" to me. So I have come back from the States, knowing more than ever how utterly loving, how patient, how caring, how merciful, how compassionate God is. Because even when my faith in God was smaller than a mustard seed, even when I was too anxious to trust him, even when I was angry and resentful and struggling to worship him, even when I thought he was doing nothing, God, this amazing, fantastic, merciful God, was quietly, carefully putting things in place to change the situation that was causing me to doubt him. And although I did not deserve any of it, God did it anyway. And isn't that the story of Jesus and the cross? And so I've come back to England knowing how powerful God is. And sometimes we forget that, don't we? In our personal lives, we can spend more time wondering if God is going to solve our problems rather than worshipping him for the fact that he can and he will in his way, in his time. And as a church, we can spend so much time producing programs and planning and making plans than actually bending down on our knees and asking God for his will to be done and his power to be let loose in our church. But I wonder what would happen if we would turn off the television and spend more time in prayer. I wonder what our lives would be like if we could ask God to let his will be done rather than persisting that our will be done. And I wonder what would happen if our churches was bold enough, radical enough, believing enough to pray more and plan less. What would happen in every meeting if we actually worshipped God, then prayed to God, and then looked at our agendas? What would happen if we'd keep on praying for those 7 people that Pastor Jacques has challenged us to pray for, even if we see nothing happening? And one of the things that I've learned from America more than anything else is that God doesn't make mistakes in our lives. Even those things that we fear and resent and feel that we cannot handle, they can be the very things that God will use to show us how much he loves us. Because the Jesus who worked miracles back then is the Jesus who's waiting to work miracles right now. But that's my story. What's your story right now, today? What is going on in your life? Are you thinking, nice story, but not relevant to me, my life is fine? I'm glad that it is. But the chances are that somewhere along the line, you're going to wonder if God is on the job. Or are you at breaking point? Are you at the point where you are longing for God to do something extraordinary in your life? Remember the verse that I shared with you before? Friends, when life gets difficult, don't jump to the conclusion that God isn't on the job. Friends, when life gets difficult, hang on to that verse. I believe that God is working things out for you. He is getting things in place. And ask the Holy Spirit to help you to believe that. Never forget that God values your life so much that he gave your life higher priority than that of his Son. So God is not going to let you down. And if God can take me all the way to America just to have an operation, God has the power to deal with whatever you are struggling with. But don't be like me. Don't wait until you are pushed to your limits to surrender all to God. Do it now. Tell him everything you feel. Tell him what you want in your life, but then ask him to make the final decision as to what is best for you. You know, God can do anything. There is nothing that God cannot do. But does that mean that he'll always use that power the way we want? No, it doesn't. But it does mean that he will use his power to do what is right for you, what is best for you. So invite him to do what he wants in your life, because that is always greater than anything we can ever imagine. And if God doesn't use his power to change those situations that you are struggling with, then ask him to use his out-of-this-world power to give you courage and strength and hope until he does. Don't be frightened to ask God to do what he wants in your stone-dead situations. So hang on. God is always on the job. Trust him. Wait on him. And the words of Psalm 40 will become your words too. I waited and I waited and waited for God. Finally, he looked at me. At last he looked. Finally he listened. He lifted me out of the ditch. He pulled me out of the deep mud to make sure I wouldn't slip. He taught me how to sing the latest God song, a praise song to our God. So hang on. Because just as God rescued me, he will rescue you. He will lift you out of that ditch. He will pull you out of the mud. So just keep inviting him to do his will with your stone-dead situations. And you too will have a story to share and a God to praise. Amen.